Imagine a silent, tense courtroom where every word spoken could shape someone's fate. Now, picture that scene being suddenly interrupted by the innocent voice of a little girl, who reveals something simple yet unexpected. "I'm hungry. Can I have a slice of pizza?" In a world where justice often feels cold and unforgiving, this request, coming from a child, might seem insignificant, but the judge's response left everyone in the room completely stunned. It wasn't a reprimand, nor was it a typical ruling. It was a revelation that stirred the emotions of everyone present, and what followed brought an unexpected twist. This isn't just another case. It's a story of courage, hope, and, most of all, compassion. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories with unexpected twists and life-changing moments, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The courtroom was tense. Clara sat next to her 7-year-old granddaughter, Louisa, as they waited for the judge's decision. Judge Raoul, known for his stern demeanor, presided over the hearing with a serious expression. The room was small, yet the weight of emotions felt overwhelming. Clara was there for a traffic violation, and the worry on her face made it clear that this was far more significant than just a $150 fine. As lawyers exchanged legal jargon, the silence became almost unbearable. Then, out of nowhere, a tiny voice broke through the tension. "Judge, can I have a slice of pizza?" Louisa's innocent request shattered the heavy atmosphere, and in that instant, something shifted in the room. Louisa's request was so unexpected that it seemed out of place in such a serious setting. Here, in the middle of a legal hearing, a child expressed her simple need with complete honesty. Perhaps she was genuinely hungry, or maybe it was her way of seeking some sense of normalcy amidst the chaos her young life had become. While some in the courtroom were stunned, others couldn't help but smile. Life has a way of surprising us with moments we never expect, and Louisa, in her simplicity, had created one of those moments. Judge Raoul, who until then had maintained an unwavering expression, paused for a moment. No one in the room could predict his reaction. Known for being strict and unyielding in his decisions, what happened next took everyone by surprise. He looked directly at the little girl and, with a smile that seemed to emerge from a distant memory of his own childhood, asked, "Pizza, huh?" His voice, typically deep and intimidating, was suddenly warm. It was a small gesture, but it had a profound impact. In that moment, the heavy air in the room lightened, and a wave of emotion filled the space. Clara, Louisa's grandmother, sat speechless. Up until that point, she had been entirely focused on defending herself against the fine, but her granddaughter had just done something remarkable. Without realizing it, Louisa had broken through the emotional walls the judge had built over the years. Clara watched the judge's smile with a mix of surprise and hope. Perhaps, in that very moment, her life was about to take an unexpected turn, one she had never anticipated. As Clara looked at the judge's face, memories of the past few years flooded her mind. Since the death of her daughter, she had been raising Louisa alone. Every day was a struggle. She juggled multiple jobs to make ends meet, but no matter how hard she worked, it never seemed to be enough. The last thing she needed was a $150 fine for parking in a restricted zone, but exhaustion had gotten the best of her that day. Now, standing before the judge, she knew this moment was critical. Her emotions were running high. Judge Raoul could sense the weight of Clara's circumstances even before she spoke. He could see in her tired eyes that this wasn't just about avoiding a traffic fine. It was about a woman who was fighting with everything she had to keep going. As Clara explained the situation that led to her parking violation, the judge began to see things differently. He realized that what Clara needed went beyond a legal decision. In that moment, he knew he had the power to transform this hearing into a moment of revelation and compassion. As Clara shared her story, the courtroom seemed to change. Louisa's pizza request no longer felt out of place. In fact, It fit perfectly into this narrative of perseverance, courage, and, above all, hope. Judge Raoul, known for his stern approach, was about to make a decision that would change Clara's life forever. Deep down, he understood that this was more than just judging a violation. It was an opportunity to show empathy and offer a helping hand. Raoul looked at Clara and, in a much softer tone than usual, said, "I understand your situation. I believe you've been through enough." The room fell silent. No one expected what he was about to say next. "I'm waiving this fine, Clara. But more importantly, I'm going to give you a list of support services for caregivers. These are people and organizations that can help you manage the immense burden you've been carrying alone." His words were like a plot twist that no one had anticipated. The judge, known for his severity, was now showing compassion. Emotion filled the room. Clara, who had been holding back tears, could no longer contain them. The judge's unexpected gesture had released all the emotions she had been suppressing. It wasn't just about the fine. It was about the fact that, after so long of fighting alone, someone had finally reached out to help. It was a personal victory for Clara and a revelation for everyone in the courtroom that, even in the most unlikely places, compassion can appear in unexpected ways. And then, in the midst of all this emotion, Judge Raoul did something even more surprising. He ordered pizza for Louisa. The courtroom, which had been so tense minutes before, now buzzed with a sense of hope and lightness. People began to smile, and a few even chuckled quietly. Little Louisa, unaware of the gravity of the situation, beamed with satisfaction. For her, it was just a pizza, but for everyone else in that room, it symbolized something far greater, the transformative power of empathy and humanity. Clara always knew that raising her granddaughter on her own wouldn't be easy. Ever since her daughter passed away, life had become a constant battle, a daily struggle just to provide the basics. Sitting in that courtroom, she felt the weight of everything resting on her shoulders. Louisa, her granddaughter, was her priority, and she did everything possible to ensure the little girl had a future. But the emotional and financial toll of that journey was immense. Between her 2 jobs and countless part-time gigs, Clara barely had time to catch her breath. And now, there she was, being judged for a slip-up that, to many, might seem insignificant, but to her, represented yet another reminder that life never gave her a break. Sleepless nights had become the norm. Between caring for the house, preparing meals, and making sure Louisa was ready for school, Clara had no time left for herself. Her body was exhausted, and her mind constantly weighed down by financial worries. The parking ticket she received for stopping in a restricted area was indeed a mistake, but it was the result of an overwhelmed mind and a body that simply couldn't keep up. Like any human being, Clara made mistakes. She felt defeated by the situation, but knew she had to muster the courage to keep moving forward. As she spoke to the judge, her voice was soft but laden with emotion. She explained how she had been rushing from one job to another that day, trying to balance all her responsibilities. Exhaustion had taken over, and she parked where she shouldn't have because, at that moment, she didn't have a choice. Clara wasn't making excuses for her actions, but she hoped that the judge could understand the context of her life. All she wanted was to overcome this obstacle and continue fighting for her granddaughter. But the emotional burden, on top of the financial stress, often felt overwhelming. Louisa, the little reason Clara woke up every day, was a joyful child, full of energy, but also carrying the pain of her mother's absence. Clara did everything she could to fill that void, but she knew it would never be enough. For Clara, this courtroom wasn't just about a $150 fine. It was about the constant feeling that, no matter how hard she tried, she was always on the verge of losing control. That moment in the courtroom was a reflection of all her struggles. Even with all her strength, there were times when hope seemed distant. Judge Raoul listened closely as Clara spoke. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the weight she carried, and most importantly, the courage she summoned every day to keep going despite all the hardships. Clara's story was one of a woman who had lost so much but remained standing, driven by an unconditional love for her granddaughter. But that love came at a cost, and she was paying dearly. The system often didn't account for the silent battles people like Clara faced daily. When Clara finished speaking, the room fell silent. It was as if everyone there, for a brief moment, could feel what she was going through. This wasn't just an ordinary case. It was the life of a woman who, despite everything, kept fighting. Clara's eyes met the judge's, and she hoped with all her heart that he could see that the fine wasn't just a financial burden. It was an emotional weight she couldn't carry at that moment. She didn't ask for mercy, but her words were a silent cry from someone who desperately needed a break, a moment to catch her breath. Clara had grown used to carrying everything on her own. The grief of losing her daughter, the responsibility of being the only parental figure for Louisa, and now the constant financial pressure. She knew her situation wouldn't change overnight, but deep down, she hoped for a small turning point, a moment of relief amidst the chaos. Louisa's innocent request for pizza had broken the ice in that room, but now the focus was back on Clara. She needed the judge's understanding, but more than that, she needed something that would give her hope, a sign that she wasn't fighting in vain. Judge Raoul, in turn, reflected on what he had just heard. He knew he couldn't solve all of Clara's problems with a single decision, but at that moment, he also knew that his response could mean more than just canceling or upholding a fine. There was something greater at stake here. Clara wasn't asking for charity, but she was clearly searching for a solution that went beyond legal formalities. Raoul understood the weight of every word she had spoken. He had seen cases like this before, but for some reason, Clara's story touched him in a different way. As Clara awaited the decision, she glanced at Louisa, who, unaware of the gravity of the situation, watched everything with curiosity. To Louisa, this was just another different day, a visit to the courtroom. But to Clara, that moment represented something much larger, the ongoing fight for a better life for both of them. And while she knew there were many challenges ahead, Clara also knew that, somehow, the courage she had to keep going came from the love she had for her granddaughter. The silence that followed Clara's words was profound. Judge Raoul, normally unshakable and known for his firm, emotionless decisions, was visibly moved. Clara's story touched him in a way few cases ever had. The courtroom, once a cold and formal environment, now seemed to be the stage for something deeply human. As he looked at the woman standing before him, Raoul felt a wave of empathy grow within him. He knew he had the power to do more than simply judge a traffic violation. There was an opportunity here to lighten the load of someone who was clearly doing everything she could just to stay afloat. Clara, on the other hand, waited nervously for the judge's decision. She knew she had laid bare all her vulnerabilities in that courtroom, something that wasn't easy for a woman used to carrying her burdens alone. But Raoul's expression had softened. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt that someone truly heard her. And more than that, someone understood the depth of her struggle. As Clara took a deep breath, little Louisa, unaware of the gravity of the situation, gazed around with curiosity, still amused by the fact that she had asked a judge for pizza. Raoul, reflecting on the situation, realized that behind every case, there was a story. And Clara's story was one of perseverance and resilience. He knew that a simple decision on a fine wouldn't solve all her problems, but at that moment, he also understood that he had the chance to make a real difference. His voice, usually stern, was softer when he said, "Clara, I'm not going to charge you this fine." The words carried an emotional weight that even surprised him. But what he said next was even more unexpected. "Beyond that," Raoul continued, "I'm going to provide you with a list of support services for caregivers, people who can help you manage some of the responsibilities you carry." The judge's words were a relief so overwhelming that Clara felt the tears roll down her face before she could even respond. It wasn't just the fine being cancelled. It was the recognition that, at last, someone saw her struggle, someone was extending a hand. The room was silent for a few moments as everyone processed the judge's unexpected generosity. The twist in the story couldn't have been more surprising. Raoul looked directly at Clara and saw, in her eyes, the weight of the world being lifted, if only for a moment. He wasn't entirely sure what had driven him to act this way. Maybe it was Louisa's innocence, reminding him of something simpler and purer in life. Maybe it was Clara's story, which echoed in his conscience that not everyone is given the same opportunities. But either way, Raoul knew this gesture wasn't just a favor. It was a response to the need for compassion, something he had learned to value more and more throughout his years on the bench. Clara, still in shock from the judge's decision, thanked him, her voice choked with emotion, unable to fully express the gratitude she felt. For her, this wasn't just a financial relief. It was a revelation that even in places where the harshness of the law reigns, there is still room for empathy and humanity. That day in the courtroom, which began with a sense of looming defeat, now felt like a turning point in her journey. She knew there would still be many challenges ahead, but that act of kindness had reignited something within her. Louisa, watching her grandmother, didn't fully understand what was happening, but she sensed that something important had changed. The judge's smile, the decision that eased Clara's heart, and, of course, the promise of pizza, made that day one of the most unusual in her life. Clara, on the other hand, was fully aware that this moment didn't erase all the problems she faced, but it gave her a pause, a chance to breathe and prepare for the continued fight. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a reminder that sometimes small acts can have a big impact. The courtroom, usually a place of tension and cold judgments, had transformed. The judge's decision wasn't just about a traffic violation. It was about recognizing the struggle of a grandmother, a family facing life's challenges with courage despite so many adversities. Raoul's words, beyond canceling the fine, offered something no money could buy: hope. Hope that with the right support, Clara could continue her journey with a little less weight on her shoulders. As Clara left the courtroom, she carried with her a list of services that might offer her some relief from the daily responsibilities she shouldered. More importantly, she walked away with the sense that she wasn't alone. The compassion the judge showed that day wasn't something she encountered often. The world sometimes felt like a harsh place, but on that day, justice came with humanity. Clara felt that she had finally found a small turning point in her story. And so, Judge Raoul's gesture, sparked by a simple request for pizza, completely changed the course of that day. Not just for Clara and Louisa, but for everyone in the courtroom, who witnessed how empathy can transform even the most unexpected places. What started as an ordinary hearing ended in a revelation that compassion can still be found, even in the hardest of times. Raoul, with one last glance at Clara and Louisa, knew that, in some way, that day had changed something within him too. The courtroom, once filled with tension and formality, had completely transformed after Judge Raoul's unexpected decision. The atmosphere was lighter, almost unrecognizable. When the judge requested that pizza be brought for Louisa, the expressions of everyone in the room softened. Such a simple gesture, but one loaded with meaning, brought smiles to the faces of those present. Clara, who had entered that courtroom with the weight of the world on her shoulders, now felt a mixture of relief and gratitude that she could hardly put into words. Little Louisa, her eyes glowing with happiness, didn't fully grasp the magnitude of the situation, but she knew this was a day unlike any other. As the pizza arrived, Raoul watched the scene with a mix of satisfaction and reflection. He knew that this hearing had taken an unexpected turn, and he was at peace with that. His subtle smile reflected the realization that today, he had made a decision that went beyond the mere application of the law. He had touched the hearts of a family that had been fighting alone for far too long. The courtroom, a place of so many stories of pain and hardship, was now witnessing a rare moment of triumph and hope. Louisa, now savoring her slice of pizza, symbolized this small but powerful victory. Clara, still processing everything that had happened, felt a profound sense of gratitude. She knew that this moment wouldn't erase all the struggles she would face in the future, but it gave her something invaluable: hope. Hope that, with the right help, she could keep fighting for her granddaughter, for her family. She left the courtroom with the certainty that this day marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Clara was no longer alone. There were people who, even without knowing her deeply, were willing to help. And that was more than she could have ever hoped for when she first entered the courtroom. Raoul, on his part, felt something shift inside him. Over the years, he had seen many cases pass through his courtroom. Some heavy, others trivial, but few had touched him as deeply as Clara and Louisa's story. He knew he hadn't solved all of that family's problems with a simple gesture of empathy, but he had planted a seed. The compassion he had shown was not something he often saw in his own decisions. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new approach to his career, one that didn't solely rely on the cold rules of the law but also took into account the human side of the stories he judged. As people began to leave the courtroom, Clara approached Raoul to thank him personally. With her voice still thick with emotion, she said, "Thank you so much. What you did for us today goes far beyond canceling a fine. You gave us hope." The judge, with a gentle smile, replied, "Sometimes justice is about giving someone a chance to start over." And with those words, Clara left the room with new determination in her heart and renewed faith in the future. For everyone present, that day in the courtroom wasn't just an ordinary hearing. It was a reminder that even in the hardest moments, simple acts of compassion can make a world of difference. Clara and Louisa left with a renewed sense of hope, and everyone who witnessed the scene would carry with them a story they would never forget. The little girl who asked for pizza in court, unknowingly, had changed the course of her grandmother's fate and touched the hearts of everyone around her. Clara's journey would still be long, filled with challenges and struggles, but that day gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time: the certainty that, no matter how tough the road, there is always room for compassion and for the unexpected turn of events that can change everything. On that day, the courtroom wasn't just a place for justice. It became a space for revelation and hope. And for Clara, that was enough to keep fighting, with her head held high, her heart full of love and faith. After following this story, you might be wondering, how can we apply this lesson of compassion in our everyday lives? The truth is, we all have the power to turn small actions into big impacts. Whether it's listening to someone going through tough times or offering a simple act of kindness, the difference you can make is enormous. So, the question is, what are you doing today to be that change? Maybe it's time to reflect on your own actions. Have you been leaving room for empathy in your daily decisions? Just like Judge Raoul, sometimes we are faced with choices that might seem small, but they have the power to transform someone's life. What if you could be the person who brings hope during a tough moment? Think about it. What small actions can you take right now that could positively impact those around you? If this story inspired you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more content like this. Together, we can keep learning, growing, and maybe even being the change the world needs.